Hi, this is Misha, and it's time for another Walther video. As you know, if you've watched the channel at all, they're kind of one of my things, and I have a new gun on the table, and the other ones are mine that I've had for a while. So I thought we would revisit the PP and the PPK, because, you know, it's always good to refresh. Why not? I kind of always get excited about a series of guns when I get a new addition to the collection. So I have lined them up here. Now, I'm cheating with this one because it's not actually a pre-war production. This is a 60s production PP. But it'll do. Then I have the new gun. This is a 1933 production, so quite early. PPK. Then I have a wartime production. Actually, this is a 1945 PP. Moving along, we have another wartime production. This is a PPK. This has the quite unique Dural frame we'll talk about in a bit. Then we have a post-war PPK. This one manufactured and marketed by Manurhin in France. And then finally, the PPKS, which is kind of a result of American law, but it's actually a really good combination of both the PP and the PPK, and this one tends to be my shooter. These are all chambered in 7.65 Browning, 32 auto. Some were offered in 380 9mm Coarse, but 32 was the standard caliber in Europe. That's what the PP and PPK were first introduced in. And I just prefer it. It seems like guns are a little more reliable in 32, especially these small frame guns. And 380 is a little more expensive, and I have plenty of guns in 9x18 Makarov anyway, which is like 380 but more punchy. So why not? Well, no reason not to regurgitate the history. Just pretend like this is an original 30s production. Sorry, I just don't have one, no real reason. I'm more interested in the PPK than the PP, so I just have a couple of PPs for representative pieces. In World War I, Walther really achieved its first success militarily with the Model 4. In that war, the Imperial Germans needed all the sidearms they could get, and as affordable as they could get them. And Walther looked at its Model 3 design and basically gave it a longer barrel and a longer grip, which could hold a larger magazine, and had great success selling these both commercially and to the German government. But they were single action only. They were firing 7.65 32. And were kind of an old style gun. So in the 1920s, Walther kept releasing newer guns in the Model series. There was the Model 8, for example, and the Model 9, which was very compact. But these were in 6.35 25 caliber, which is obviously at best a defensive round. They were working behind the scenes though on the Portrayed pistol, the PP. This was designed as a compact but still more or less, I wouldn't say full-size, but medium-sized police and potentially military service sidearm. In its biggest update to the older series, like the Model 4, was its single action trigger with exposed hammer and also double action trigger. This was the first commercially available, or at least at the very most commercially successful, single double action pistol to go into mass production. It also featured the decockers you saw me use. Once it decocked, this doubles as a safety. You can let it up and put it back down and the trigger is still blocked. We have a loaded chamber indicator. Some could have lanyard loops like this one. We have grip panels, back strap. It's a simple blowback gun. Today this is a very common design with the pull down trigger guard for disassembly. And the reason it's so common today, this was very popular. And so far, it's been copied dozens, if not even hundreds of times over the years, from the Makarov itself to Bursas, and all kinds of guns have copied the PP design. The standard version has a 3.9-inch barrel, so 4 inches basically. It's about 6 3/4, 6.7 inches long, so small but not terribly small. And a 4-inch barrel firing 32 will give you good accuracy. It has a steel frame and slide, so it weighs 23 ounces, which by today's standards is a little heavy, although a lot of modern carry guns are a whole lot lighter. But for the 1920s, when this was being developed, it was actually quite compact, light. And where this really excelled, it was a simple design, doubly so considering it came out of Germany of all places, and therefore very reliable. Also, because it used a fixed barrel, it was actually quite accurate. It fed from 8-round magazines. And had typical German quality. Walther would introduce this officially in 1929, and it would be sold commercially throughout the 1930s, including some to the German government and police. When the Nazis came into power, they would purchase a large number of these for use by various police and special units who needed a smaller, more compact gun. They definitely preferred the 7.65 version, 32. By the 1930s, Walther would have the 9mm Coarse 380 version out as well, but the Germans really didn't like 380. They wanted to standardize on 32, which, makes sense for them. So there's actually a lot of history with these PPs. After that was successful, our famous PPK was introduced. It would first hit the commercial market in 1931 as the compact version of the PP. This was basically the Palazzo pistol Camano, and it was designed for people really needing a more compact gun, whereas the PP was kind of a standard service size, if a bit on the small side. This was a conceal and carry gun. They scaled it down. We're only at about 6.1, just a hair over 6 inches tip to tip. We have a 3.3, or 3 1/4 really, inch barrel, so we've lost nearly 3/4 of an inch here. We've also lightened it up a bit. We're still on a steel frame, but this is 21 ounces, so you save a little bit. It feeds from slightly smaller 7-round mags. Some will have a finger rest. Some will, it would usually sell these when new with one of each. You would have a flush like this one, and you would also have a finger rest. The capacity was the same, it's just the floor plate was different. Generally speaking, mechanically, these were the same. We have the same double, single trigger with decocker safety. We have the same takedown, same simple blowback, but there are a few differences. For one, we have a fixed lanyard attachment, kind of more of a staple shape. And as you see, the grips are also different. This is actually a relatively big difference. Whereas the PP has 2 separate grips and then a steel back strap, the PPK has one continuous U-shaped grip made of bakelite, or an early form similar to. It wraps around the back, and this was done for a few reasons. One, it made it a little more compact, not having to have steel back here. And also, it meant they didn't have to have steel covering the mainspring, which is under here. So if you take the grips off, you have direct access to your mainspring, which saved weight and manufacturing. And they also thought this would make for a more consistent, comfortable grip. And I can see that, because you're not transitioning. So that's actually quite a big difference mechanically and physically that people don't always recognize. They just think of the PPK as being a small PP, which it definitely is, but the grips are different. One thing I will point out, the grips on these original ones from the 30s and 40s almost always have at least a small hairline crack, either on the side near the screw hole or on the back near the webbing. The webbing is pretty obvious. It's just where it was fired in pressure because it's thin here. This Bakelite they used it's become brittle with age, and it was again an earlier synthetic form, so that they didn't quite have the formula as perfected as they would later. Also, people would over tighten these screws, and since there's really no metal to reinforce it, it would crack this U-shaped grip trying to squeeze it together too much, and the tension would hit here. So if you find one of these, and this one has a small crack, as pretty much all the ones I've ever had to do, maybe it's just because I've never been able to afford a $3,000 collector grade PPK, but I'll take what I can get on my budget. Don't pass it up just because the grip has a tiny crack. Usually these are very stable. Worst case, you can either take these grips off and store them safely and put on reproductions, or at least newer ones, or just have them fixed. But these would also be used by the German police and military. In fact, a lot of times they preferred the PPK. These are very, very popular with the Nazis. High-ranking officials would often acquire or be gifted PPKs for their service. There's what they call the party leader version. Also, the German military police would really prefer these, and some flyers in the Luftwaffe would prefer these because they are small, they're a little bit light, but we still have a 7+1 capacity in 32. In 380, this would actually be a 6+1, but still a good capacity for the 30s. And the Walther factory would continue to manufacture these through the 30s, selling them commercially, even over here in America. And then, of course, once the war began, most all of these would go to the military, be it through military acquisitions or from private purchases from officers. So that's pretty much where they went. And they would be exported abroad, as would the PP, and used by several other militaries before, during, and after World War II. And, for example, Sweden. Now, the PP and PPK, like most guns in Germany during World War II, did not escape simplifications, especially towards the end of the war. That's why I actually have this PP, aside from just wanting an original for the collection. This has a lot of the wartime simplifications, which are interesting to say the least. Generally speaking, it's the same, but we have a few omissions. For one, I don't know if you can see it, the loaded chamber indicator is gone. This little pin channel that actually saved a lot of time in machining. The bluing is very coarse on this. And some parts, like the magazine, are actually phosphated. The Germans were really starting to phosphate things beginning around 1944. Obviously, also it has wooden grips instead of the synthetic. I actually kind of like these wood grips. They're a little thicker, so it gives a larger grip. And this version actually fills the hand very nicely. Unfortunately, while it's fine, the trigger and really the safety on this one are not as smooth as other Walthers. You can tell that the manufacturing was quite rushed. These would never reach Japanese last-ditch production simplifications, but still could get pretty coarse, especially on the finishing. They would also simply mark them AC for the Walther factory rather than the Walther banner. And they would manufacture these right up until the end of the war, and even put some together for GIs. Now, they did experiment a bit. Oh, and let me just pull this back for a sec. There was one other simplification. If you look here at the frame versus on this one here, you'll see that this one has a small kind of lightning cut step right here near the trigger guard. It kind of steps down. It's mostly a cosmetic thing and to save a little bit of weight, and then just, like I said, mostly make it look better. During the war, they would actually get rid of that and just leave it unmachined there. So just showing a few other simplifications they would do. Yeah, even on a blowback gun, they could find little ways to simplify it. Kind of interesting, I think. Anyway, sorry. We'll move on to this one I picked up. This is another PPK. This is a 1943 production for the Germans. It's on a Dural frame, which is an early version of an aluminum alloy they were trying out in handguns. We still have a steel slide and, of course, barrel. This is all the same. The dimensions are all the same. Grips are the same. We have the non-lightning cut. That doesn't want to hold open. There we go. This also has the loaded chamber indicator still. And this has the finger rest mag with the Bakelite floor plate. But yeah, they tried out the Dural frame. Really, for more on that, check out our P38 video, because while this was nominally strong enough, this mix of aluminum for 32, they also tried it in the 9mm guns, the P38s, and had very different results. That said, even firing 32, it's not recommended to shoot these today because the mix wasn't always perfect. It was wartime, so standards weren't as high as they could have been. And some people claim actually these Dural frames were previously just experimentals that were put up and then recycled when they needed more guns. So these are mostly just collectible. I picked this one up years ago and I think it's really neat. It does make it a lot lighter. You're saving about 4 ounces, 3 to 4 ounces. So you're getting down into modern carry gun weights. You're at about 17 to 18 ounces. So not bad at all. It would actually inspire Walther after the war. So let's move to there. Not to get too much into the history of post-war Germany in this video. Needless to say, the Karl Walther factory in Zella-Mehlis was captured by the Allies in April of 1945, and firearms production ended. Now, Fritz Walther, the patriarch of the family at the time, after his father had passed away, did escape to the West. He escaped the Soviet onslaught with his family, and also with patents, blueprints, and other documentation related to the Walther pistols. However, his factory and all of the machinery was lost. In West Germany, following the war, firearms production was not allowed. It was essentially a divided and occupied nation. However, Mr. Walther would establish a new factory in Ulm, Germany, incidentally, where it's still located today, in 1947, and he would begin manufacturing business machines, especially adding machines, calculators, things of that nature. You know, still technical, but not firearms. He would find success with this. However, with the growing threat of the Soviet Union and the Communist Warsaw Pact, it was decided to let Germany slowly rearm. First, it would rearm using old World War II guns, for example, K98s, Lugers, existing PPKs, PPs, P38s, so on and so forth. So for a time being, firearms manufacturing was not allowed still and was not really needed while the new Bundeswehr was starting to get on its feet. Meanwhile, in 1950 or thereabouts, Fritz Walther would partner with a firm in France known as Manurhin to produce under license for him his pistols. First, in 1952, they would introduce the PP, and then in 1953, the PPK, which this is here. This is a 50s production PPK out of France. It was made with permission and all the support that Fritz could give, so it's made to the original specs. It does have a few minor updates. For example, the front of this frame is a little more rounded, whereas the original ones are kind of more boxy. You see these kind of protrusions here where it's more squared off. Well, they rounded those out a bit for obvious reasons. Cosmetic, sure, but also for holstering and one less point of snag. They would also, if you can, probably can't see it on the camera, but these rear sights are smooth here. There's very little. It's kind of ramped. On the 1950s guns, they would kind of go to a little more ornate rear sight. This was done to give a much better sight picture. And for durability, they would go to a better style of grip. And it's still the same pattern, but they improved the formula, actually kind of switching away from a Bakelite type to more of an actual synthetic polymer type. So if you find these Manurhin guns, usually the grips are in much better condition. So yeah, in the early 50s, Manurhin would start producing guns under license for Walther. And in 1957, it was finally allowed, well, actually 1955 to be exact, sorry. It was allowed that West Germany could start up arms manufacturing again. So in 57, the factory in Ulm started producing the P38, an updated version for the Bundeswehr. And Manurhin would keep making the PP and PPK under license. Now, a short time later, guns marked made in West Germany would appear. This is a pretty well-known fact by now, but these guns, while they were blued and final assembly and proof testing were done at Ulm, most of the manufacturing was still done in France. So really your Cold War era, your 1960s and 70s guns were either Manurhin marked or they were West German marked, but they were still sourced and built from parts from France no matter what. It's just, where final assembly and proof testing was done was the country of origin according to the European standards at the time. So really, Walther never much picked up PP and PPK production in the 60s, 100% in-house. Instead, they really outsourced it, and what they do today is still being outsourced, such as the PPKE, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. In the late 50s, around 59, Walther would revisit the Dural concept, like this gun here. They would improve the formula further, as they had been starting to produce guns in the P38 line with an alloy frame. They would use the same alloy mix to make the PPK-L, which was a lightweight version, basically just like this. Kind of interesting. It wasn't in production that long. They ceased in 1968. These were mostly all for commercial sales, although some militaries did continue to purchase them. Like I said, Sweden would use them. James Bond would use them, and based on his reputation, they probably at least sold 20 or 30 to him a year, as much as he seemed to lose guns. Actually, a lot of the James Bond PPKs in the movies were made in France. So enjoy that. They were very high quality, though. However, this arrangement and everything wouldn't last long. In 1968, after the Kennedy assassination, both of them, and the Martin Luther King assassination and so on, a new crime bill type thing was passed. The Gun Control Act of '68 set sporting purpose clauses on imports. And so guns had to meet a certain points system to be importable. And unfortunately for the PPK, it did not meet the system. It didn't have enough points. It was too light, too small, and so could no longer be imported post '68. So all of the PPKs in this country, they were brought over legitimately, were either bringbacks from World War II or were 1950s and 60s imports. To get around this, Walther introduced the PPK-S. And this is a simple gun. They took the barrel and slide, so 3.3 inches from the PPK, and they slapped it on a PP frame. This has the longer grip, so it has the deeper 8-shot mag, and it has the metal back strap and the dual 2-sided panels. Now, I said at the beginning of the video, I like this version, and it was kind of made by accident. The larger grip is more comfortable. The PP grip style is still more durable. We have an extra round. One other change they added was a ribbed trigger. Now, I've seen this on even their police guns. This is something that Walther did anyway for pretty much all of their guns beginning in the late 60s and into the 70s. This also counted as a target trigger, giving the gun more points. So the longer grip and the updated trigger let the PPKS be importable. Now, other guns that you'll see they try to make comply with the 68 might have thumb rest grips, so-called target grips, or adjustable rear sights, so-called target sights. Just those are other ways. So I like the way they preferred to do it. It made an interesting combination of the two guns. We're still very compact, but we have a deeper, higher capacity, more comfortable to shoot gun. Now, usually with compact guns, when you're trying to conceal it, the grip is the hard part. But since this is still quite small, it's not so bad. And actually, this gun here is an early PPKS. I got it from Century a long time ago, and it's a police trade-in. So that tells me that European police were using these. And they did. They purchased quite a few PPs throughout the 1960s. There were a lot of them that were produced for police use, because 32 was still considered very adequate up until the 70s, and when terrorists started to come in, especially with body armor, and then the switch to 9mm happened. But that's a story for the P38 video, or P1 video. Just to go quickly through the remaining import history, Manurhin and Walther would have a falling out in the 70s. Manurhin would continue to produce guns until 86, more or less not under license anymore, kind of semi-illegally, but by that point the patents were out on these guns anyway. Interarms would be the importer into the USA. This is an Interarms import. They imported a lot of stuff through the 50s, 60s, and into the 80s. In 1978, they would arrange a relationship with Ranger of the USA to produce under license in the USA the PPK to get around that 68 ban on imports. So you'll see Ranger manufactured PPKs in the 80s. Oftentimes these are stainless steel, and that means for sure it's not German. Walther never did a stainless steel PPK in Germany. You might see a nickeled one, but never stainless steel. So stainless steel, especially ones in 380, are American produced under license guns. But this situation wouldn't last forever. Interarms went by the wayside. Walther moved on to more modern things. They also had some financial troubles. As I said, Manurhin went out of business in around 1982, with the last of their guns kind of coming over, being assembled from parts through 85, 86. And that was pretty much the end of that. Now, Smith & Wesson would pick up the PP and PPK line, but they really wouldn't make the PP. You would just see the PPK being made, and by this point, there was really no police or military interest for sure. This was just for the civilian kind of nostalgia market. Plus, carry guns were really starting to catch up. So that's when the Smith & Wessons came in, and then that relationship fell apart, and Walther opened up Walther USA, and so on and so forth. But the 21st century PPKs are really a different bird. They're not manufactured for police or military use anymore like originally we had. But yeah, I just thought I'd ramble on about the history a bit because of my new 1933 PPK. I only had the Dural before, which I really don't want to shoot. Kind of debating on the Manurhin. It's neat, kind of gives me the generations. Basically, this would have been made around 53, 55. Like I said, this is 43, 33. So it's kind of one from each decade of their production until they were prohibited from import. Neat guns. Obviously, I grew up in the James Bond era, and that's where a lot of us heard about the PPK. But that's not to say that it didn't have a history long before Ian Fleming introduced it. Also, remember that James carried a Beretta and the books long before the PPK. And, you know, for a long time, a .32 was a perfectly adequate defense gun, really until they were able to make carry guns small enough in 9mm to rival it. This was one of the better options. Trigger is fine. I mean, it's heavy enough intentionally so you're not going to accidentally shoot, and it has a nice safety. Disassembly is extremely easy. As I said at the beginning, for a German gun, these are very simple. And this is what a lot of guns such as the Makarov, PA-63, and a lot of other things are based on. So it's a very influential gun. Well, if you want to hear more about the history of how these guns pertain to me, we've got a video called Story Time, Episode 3, that talks about my affinity for Walthers. So for more of a personal touch, you might want to check that out. And we have plenty of other videos on different Walthers. Like I said, the P38, the P1, even the G41 and G43. So if this interests you, if you're bored or whatever, you might want to check those out. And also, we'd love to hear your own stories with the PP, PPK, PPKS. I actually, like I said, really like this PPKS. Came in through Century. It's got enough finish wear to it that it's kind of my shooter out of these. Although I have shot this Manurhin quite a bit too. I've had good luck with modern ammo out of these. It seems like in .32 they work just fine. Well, if you like the video, please click like. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please click the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll catch you next time.